The NBA draft continues to inch closer, and the Sixers are zeroing in on what the best way to deal with that pick is. Well, another name I want to bring up as far as a potential draft pick was mentioned by the recent Bleacher Report mock draft, which is Kyle Filipowski. Now, this is one of the more popular college players, a guy who spent 2 seasons at Duke, and in this video, I want to dive into what he could bring to the Sixers, whether this is a fit, and my overall thoughts on kind of using the draft pick at this point in time. So let's start off with jump with kind of a general sense of the scouting report, this being written by Jonathan Wasserman here, that obviously he went to Duke. He is from the USA, 20 years old, a power forward center, 7 foot, 248 pounds. He did officially measure in for the actual the combine measurements that he was 6'10 and 3/4, so a shade short of that 7-foot label, but still pretty real deal size there. And dive more into the specifics. He writes, Kyle Filipowski could have been a one-and-done first-rounder last year, but he returned to Duke and wound up improving his NBA draft stock. As a sophomore, he was the Blue Devils' clear #1 option and a player whom opponents had to game plan for. But his role will change as he moves from college to the NBA, where he'll be more of a complementary piece. Filipowski sharpened and expanded specific skills that should allow him to fit in easier in the NBA, most notably his shooting, passing, and defense. He's now one of the favorites to be the first NCAA big man selected in June. That will actually be Donovan Clingan. However, scouts continue to debate Filipowski's ceiling and whether it maxes out as a front court reserve, starting role player, or borderline star. So I do think borderline star is strong, but I do think this guy is going to be, at the minimum, a serviceable role player, and at the maximum, I think something much more than that. I do think there's a world where he ends up kind of a borderline starter or a low-end starter, a guy that can compete on a winning team. I'm a little bit more of the mindset that I see him fitting in as a stretch 4. I don't really see him holding up as a real deal center, but I don't think that is necessarily a criticism of his game. I think that's just more of his fit. And most specifically why I say that, I love the way that he moves on the perimeter, that his footwork is really advanced stuff, and I was really impressed in a lot of moments this year where he got switched out, had to slide his feet and move with a smaller player, and hung pretty well. So that is something that opened my eyes. Obviously, it's a different beast when you're trying to do that at the NBA level, and he's going to have to learn with that, but I am intrigued by the concept of him being more of a true forward rather than being looked at as a center. So you can get the size advantage, maximize some of the stretch 4 ability that he possesses, although shooting does still have a little bit of a ways to go. And let's just dive into what he has done on the floor. So to take a look at his stats from his 2 years of college, I do want to point out some of the changes here. So from the scoring standpoint, went from 15.1 points per game as a freshman to 16.4 as a sophomore. His rebounding numbers did go down slightly, went from 9.0 as a freshman to 8.3 as a sophomore. A little bit strange there, considering I personally feel like the team as a whole was better rebounders in his freshman year. Derek Lively was on that team, although he didn't play a ton for that team. Did not seem to be well liked in the Duke program and has had a much better rookie season at the NBA level than he did in college. But the point being that it is a little surprising to me to see that be the case. The assists did grow, that he went from 1.6 as a freshman to 2.8 as a sophomore. I'm going to get more into that there. 1.3 steals as a freshman, 1.1 as a sophomore. His blocks over doubled, going from 0.7 to 1.5 per game. He also did cut down his turnovers a little bit from 2.5 to 2.1. Now, the shooting conversation, from the field overall, he shot 44.1% as a freshman, 50.5% in his sophomore season. The three-point numbers did take a significant stride forward, but still have a ways to go. That on 3.4 long-range attempts per game as a freshman, shot just 28.2%. This season, he shot 34.8% on 3.1 per game, but I will point out there was some aggression in his free throw shooting. That number dropped down to 67.1% this year, compared to the 76.5% he shot his freshman year. And it was like that just about from start to finish, that he started the year a little bit cold, shooting at the free throw line, and was never able to climb that above the 70% range. That is something that needs to change, but I am pretty confident that it will, that he will be capable of being a 70+% free throw shooter when everything is said and done at the NBA level. So I kind of touched on a little bit of what he brings statistically. To dive into some of the characteristics, I want to pull up here. I'm going to start with these strengths here. This, again, written by Jonathan Wasserman, that he says, #1, ball handling and passing for a big. While Filipowski didn't drastically increase his scoring volume this year, more high-level passing reads have made him a more effective offensive player. He's become more of a multi-dimensional threat from the post with his vision and advantageous height. He's shown off some playmaking as well, dropping off live dribble passes after attacking a closeout. This is one of the biggest things that stand out to me, and most particularly where I think this could be useful, is I think he makes really good decisions out of the short roll, an opportunity where he is setting a screen up top, where he slips behind the defenders, gets a little pocket pass, and all of a sudden you have a 4-on-3 in the half-court setting that you are able to get downhill, attack for yourself, or just create for others. I do think that's going to be a role where he's able to generate some really high-level offense at the NBA level. A guy like Bruce Brown is a person that does that at an incredibly high level, and I think Filipowski, having all the additional size that he does possess, could even maximize this even further. So that's something that has really stood out to me. I do think he can be a little bit more of a half-court like playmaker and decision-maker than he gets credit, and that is incredibly impressive at 7 feet tall. He particularly, I've noticed, he's made really good decisions out of the double team. That at Duke, it was him and Jared McCain who were the two stars, the two focal points on opponent scouting reports, that when there was too many thrown his way, 2 and 3 guys, he did a nice job not forcing things and making the right basketball read. And that included, in a lot of situations, making some pretty high-level cross-court pass over to the defense to generate some corner three-pointers. I really like that. I'm pretty high on his playmaking as a player. Now to talk about some other strengths here, the shooting potential. And Wasserman writes that Filipowski made more threes this year despite attempting them at roughly the same rate as last season. He's had a comfortable, balanced shot dating back to high school, mostly shooting off the catch. Playing the 4, he'll spend extended time spacing the floor from the wings and picking and popping. His consistency hasn't fully been there, but the threat is. And he also adds about the paint scoring, saying Filipowski finished with more success and physicality around the basket this year. He can use his footwork and strength to carve out the space and lay up angles from below the rim. Filipowski is a tough cover from the short corners with his ability to rip and go in either direction. With his back to the basket, he can spin, drop step, or pivot into a high percentage shot. Filipowski's limited explosiveness takes away some opportunity for him, but he should still be an option to feed around the key. So we're not going to see a ton of post offense from any player these days, but Kyle Filipowski is a guy that is capable of going to work in the post, to go to the drop steps, go to the spin move. He does have a pretty impressive array of post moves, but definitely one of the better in the draft and probably one of the better in modern basketball right now. Again, I just think from a role perspective that you have to be a real superstar. You have to be Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid to get those type of opportunities. I don't expect that to be the case with Kyle Filipowski now or ever, to be perfectly frank, but the shooting potential is something that is worth noting, that if you can space the floor, if you can be a true stretch big man, there is a place for you in the NBA, and I do think that he is trending towards that the shot looks good by my eyes. There's nothing mechanically wrong with it. I'm absolutely comfortable with the way that the stroke looks. It's just he's got to get more consistent, got to keep getting reps, got to keep getting better, and I do think that will be the case, that he is a guy that has high pedigree as a shooter, even dating back to high school, that when he came to Duke, this is one of the expected ways that he was going to make an impact, that the numbers have been worse than the expectation was, but at times that can lead to the Sixers having a chance to draft him at 16, which otherwise might not have been even the situation here. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about the weaknesses in the game because he is not a perfect basketball player. So to dive into that here, number one, the creation upside. Against power forwards, Filipowski could have trouble gaining a step or creating separation in face-up situations. He has a higher center of gravity and lacks blow-by burst or explosion. Filipowski could be a threat to create for himself around the post, but his future team isn't likely to consistently feature him throughout the games. Also notes the free throw percentage, which dipped below 70% for most of the season. While that means leaving points on the board for a player who will take plenty of contact inside, it's also raised some questions about the legitimacy of his three-point shooting outlook and improved percentage. We'll touch on that a little bit further, but also the defensive upside I do want to harp on. That this is written as a weakness that says, for a 7-footer, Filipowski did not block a shot at a high rate. Lacking length and verticality, he doesn't seem to project as a major asset in rim protection. Filipowski did show promising sides of perimeter foot speed, but realistically, he won't be locking down any forwards. He just needs to avoid being a liability in space. So this is a pretty brutal review of his defense. I'll say by my eyes, I think it's better than that makes it sound. I will note with the shot blocking conversation, he is a rare NBA player to measure a negative wingspan, meaning his wingspan is shorter than his height. Seth Curry was another guy who that was the case was, and obviously Seth was no defensive stopper either. I think people read into that a little bit too much, but it does limit his shot blocking potential. And to dive into some of the specifics of this, I did think this was worth noting here, that statistically, Filipowski is fairly impactful at the rim defensively. He's recording a 7.5% block percentage, and opponents are only finishing 45% of their attempts at the rim when he's the primary paint defender. Now, I do want to finish that, but just that statement alone right there shows me a little something, that there may be a little bit more to the defense than people are giving him credit. But to dive into the full thing here, once again, a 7.5% block percentage and opponent shooting just 45% at the rim with him as the primary defender. writes, "These are both solid numbers, but for reference, are not at the level of recently drafted rim protectors. Example, Chet Holmgren or Walker Kessler, who, by the way, are both phenomenal rim protectors. So I think that's a bit of a high bar to set for this one. But it adds in the second paragraph here. Holmgren recorded a 12.6% block percentage as a freshman at Gonzaga, while opponents finished only 35% of their attempts at the rim against him. Kessler, meanwhile, recorded a 19.1 block percentage, and opponents finished only 33% of their attempts at the rim against him when he was a sophomore at Auburn. While not a completely fair comparison, since Kessler and Holmgren are two of the best rim protectors from recent classes, it's important to analyze the production previous recently drafted rim protectors had in college while projecting future NBA prospects. So yeah, I'm not saying Kyle Filipowski is going to be in the conversation for the best shot blockers in the NBA, but I do think he can hang more than he's given credit. And I've mentioned the footwork. That is definitely one of the bigger appeals to me. Like, if you want to completely compare him to Walker Kessler here, Walker Kessler, an elite rim protector, but very limited in some of the other things that he can do. That there's no world in Walker Kessler can get switched out in guard and hang in space. I think there might be with Kyle Filipowski, that he is really nimble in the way that he moves, particularly in his lateral side to side. And I think as far as the athleticism talk, he's not an athlete in the sense of him going up, slamming lobs, and having this vertical pop, but he is athletic in some like his smooth movement. Like he does a nice job of hanging in the air on some of these finishes. I think he's a better athlete than he is in a lot of people's heads here. Now, to talk about role and long-term potential, my biggest driving force here is the Sixers have still forever failed to pair Joel Embiid with a true stretch big man. There has never been a Lauri Markkanen. There has never been a guy built to play next to him, and Lauri's still at the top of my dream wish list there, even ahead of Mikal Bridges. But I don't think either one of those are likely in this case. I don't think Kyle Filipowski is going to be quite Lauri Markkanen, but I think he could be Kelly Olynyk, maybe even Kelly Olynyk and more. That I think he could grow into something better than that. If that shot translates, and I get that it is an if, he can be a real deal stretch four, and there's other things that he does do. That even me talking about that I project him more of a power forward than a center, we're still talking about a dude that averaged 9.0 and 8.3 rebounds per game in his 2 years in college. I do think the pedigree is there. I do think that, like, a lot of people had super high expectations for him to return for his second season to take this massive stride forward. To me, it looked in my eyes that he improved in a lot of the minor areas, the decision-making, the playmaking, opportunities like that. He didn't take this next step as a scorer, as a rebounder, or some of the main skills that people tend to keep their eyes on. But I think, honestly, that's more valuable when projecting the way that he does move forward. So I'm a believer in Kyle Filipowski. Again, not a dude that is probably at the top of my list. I'm still locked in on the Devin Carter train for my top choice for the Sixers to use that 16th pick, but I would have no complaints if Kyle Filipowski ends up in a Sixers uniform. I would be quite thrilled. I think that would be a useful pick and something that I can absolutely get behind there. So let me know if you guys agree with me in the comments, your thoughts on Filipowski's game, where you think he projects from a positional standpoint, if you're on the same page with me or not, and anything else that you got on your mind. Also, make sure you are hitting that like button to let me know you're listening, and dropping a subscribe to keep the Digest family growing here. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this video here. Cannot wait for the draft to continue inching closer and break down every other piece of content going on in the Sixers offseason. So thank you guys once again for tuning in, and we'll talk with you next time right here on Sixers Digest.